is on a little vacation. He and his wife. Idea to click in. You're still making excuses, and I'm scratching the back of my head saying, hey, we've been talking for 7 weeks already about excuses. I have one more for you, and hopefully by the end of this one, it clicks. But the idea is we are responsible for our actions. We are responsible for what we do. We are responsible for the way in which we live our lives according to God's standard. And so we have no excuse when it comes to following the Word of God. This morning we're going to be in the gospel. We're going to be in the book of Ruth, chapters 3 and 4, if you want to turn there ahead of time. But I want to start by reading Leviticus chapter 25. The year of Jubilee. You shall count 7 weeks of years, 7 times 7 years, so that the time of the 7 weeks of years shall give you 49 years. Then you sound the loud trumpet on the 10th day of the 7th month. On the day of atonement, you shall sound the trumpet throughout all of your land. You shall consecrate the 50th year and proclaim liberty throughout the land to all its inhabitants. It shall be a jubilee to you, a great celebration, a glorious day. Even when each of you shall return his property and each of you shall return to his clan, you shall celebrate. That 50th year shall be a jubilee for you. In it, you shall neither sow nor reap what grows itself, nor gathers the grapes from the undressed vines, for it is Jubilee. It shall be holy to you. You will eat its produce from the field. I'm going to continue reading in just a second, but why the year of Jubilee? Why is that even important? When God gave the land of Canaan to the children of Israel, it was so that they would possess it as an inheritance for the rest of their lives. So, the idea is, this land of Israel, that is your place, and you keep it for the rest of your lives. The problem is, if you go through a year of famine, or you go through a year of hardship, and you cannot afford to continue carrying out your land, you might have to lease it out to someone. If you do that, you might not be able to pay the debt. And so, over time, you could lose your family land, which is supposed to be your inheritance, if there is not a way to return it. The year of Jubilee was the day when they celebrated the return of the land back to the family. I thought about it this way in the early service. Suppose my family had 100 acres, okay? Now, we could never afford 100 acres at this point in time. My personal family, we're never going to afford 100 acres as far as I know. But just suppose that we had 100 acres of land. And say we planted crops or whatever. We had trees or something. We have 100 acres, but 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, it's a bummer crop, and we cannot pay our bills. We have to lease out that land. That means for the next several years, I don't own that land. I don't own the rights to the crops in that land. I've leased it to someone else. They get all of the money, and I have nothing to support my family. The idea of Jubilee is that people don't get a chance to just swallow up farms over and over and over again, but it goes back to the family. This is God's original intent. So listen what happens in the year of Jubilee. In this year of Jubilee, each of you shall return to his property. And if you make a sale to your neighbor or buy from your neighbor, you shall not wrong one another. You shall pay your neighbor according to the number of years after the Jubilee, and he shall sell to you according to the number of years of crops. If the years are many, you shall increase the price, and if they are few, you shall reduce the price, for it is the number of crops that he is selling to you. So the idea of leasing out the crops. Verse 18, therefore, you shall do my statutes and keep my rules and perform them, and then you will dwell in the land securely. The land will yield its fruit, and you will eat your fill and dwell in it securely. It's a great idea. Can you imagine? Say we're the children of Israel, and we get to split up, I don't know, the county of Fresno. Your land gets to return to you after 50 years. That's a really cool idea. Because if I do something wrong, or if we can't afford we can't afford to pay our bills from our crop, from our land, and we have to lease it out, it will eventually go back to my children or my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren, and I know there's inheritance for them in the future. The problem is there was actually never a year of Jubilee celebrated that we're aware of. It's a good idea. It never happened. What's the problem with people? we're a little bit stingy. We're a little bit greedy. And we are a little bit too concerned with ourselves. Sometimes, when it comes to excuse making, we really consolidate for our own stuff. Today, the excuse is, it's not worth the effort. It's not worth my time. It's not worth my investment. I would like to invest, but it's just not worth it for me. That is a very me-centered philosophy. I want you to see this morning that God had a different plan in mind for Israel, and God still has a different plan in mind for humanity when it comes to how we live our lives according to his law. Join me as we pray. God, we thank you for this morning. We thank you for your grace and your mercy, the peace that you have bestowed upon us. Lord, we thank you for the ability to come to church and worship you freely. We thank you for your word, which inspires us to live holy lives. We thank you for your spirit, which continues and persists with us every day as we live faithfully. God, we just pray that you would help us to understand the text this morning, that you would speak to our lives, and that we would go away unchanged, or changed. In your name we pray, amen. Have you ever had a situation in life that forced you to make a decision that you didn't want to make, and then you finally made that decision and you come away feeling like it just wasn't worth it? Anyone? When I was with the youth group, we would talk on Wednesday night. As we talked on Wednesday night, we would then go to Taco Bell. We'd pile up into the van, we'd go to Taco Bell, and we would enjoy the bounty that is Taco Bell. Well, Taco Bell / Long John Silver's, because they combined at one point in time. So we go to Taco Bell Long John's, and I had just talked about paying attention to what God has in store for you, paying attention to God's plan for your life. And we go to Taco Bell, and as we get there, we pile out of the van, and there's a man standing there who is asking for food. And he says, hey, would you buy me a meal from Taco Bell? And I'm thinking, no, this is severely inconvenient right now. I'm watching a whole bunch of teens. If I pay attention to you, one of them might run into the street. It's possible. I could lose a teen tonight. This is entirely inconvenient. But I look at the teens and I look at the man, I'm thinking, put into practice what you say. Okay, yes, I can buy you a meal. What would you like? Boom, he spouts it off. He's got number 3, add this, add a second order of this, and I want a Diet Pepsi. And I was like, dude, you know that way too fast. But you know what? He asked for a meal. I promised I would give him a meal. So, all right, I'll go inside. I'll get you the meal. I said, come on in. Why don't you wait for us? If I'm going to provide a meal, just come in and talk to us. And he said, I can't go inside. Why not? They won't let me. Oh yeah, I put 2 and 2 together. Okay, they won't let you because you've come inside before. All right. So I go, and I order, and I let all the teens go, and I order, and the guy's like looking in the window. You know, it's dark outside. He's peering in. And I see him, and I'm like, it's kind of making me nervous because he's just like staring at me. I'm like, I think he doesn't believe that I'm going to buy him a meal. And I'm waiting. It's like the longest time ever for me to receive my food. Finally, they call my number. I go grab the bag, and I run outside to meet this man because I know he's been waiting. He's nowhere to be found. I can't find him anywhere. I go around the corner. I look in the street. I look by the van. I can't find him anywhere in the parking lot. And I remember thinking to myself, that was a waste of money. I can't believe that he just treated me like that. Asked me to buy him something. I bought him something. He runs off. I come to find out later, it was because he actually thought I wasn't following through. And he just went on to the next store to find someone else that would buy him a meal. But I remember thinking, cold fish doesn't reheat very well. That was a waste of my time. There are times where we are forced to make decisions, and we think about it after the fact, and we say, you know what, it wasn't worth my time. But there are also times where we are confronted with a decision, and we automatically assume it will not be worth my time, and so we don't do it. What I would like to propose this morning is that your actions, however small or insignificant you might feel that they are, have the ability to impact a greater and a larger group of people, but you don't know it until you act. This morning, as we get to the book of Ruth, we're going to start in chapter 3. I'll do my best to summarize chapters 1 and 2. There are only 4 chapters. If you are not familiar with the book of Ruth, I would encourage you to take 20 minutes this week and read it on your own. Chapters 1 through 4, just go through, read it, so that you have the entire, well, for one, so you can double check my summary, make sure I'm correct. But number 2, so that you have the entire picture of what's going on with the book of Ruth. Today's excuse comes from the story of Ruth, and this seemingly insignificant book from the Old Testament carries with it a foreshadowing of Jesus that just blows my mind. One of the names used to describe Jesus is that, or the titles used to describe Jesus is that of Redeemer. Galatians chapter 3 verse 13 states, Christ, this is another title for Jesus, redeemed us from the curse of the law by becoming a curse for us. For it is written, cursed is everyone who hanged on a tree. As our Redeemer, Jesus literally took our death penalty for us and paid the debt that we have incurred due to sin. So I've sinned, you've sinned, each of us is a sinner, and if you say that you have never sinned, we'll start talking about your life, and we'll go back and say, well, what did you do here? What did you do here? What did you do here? We are filled with sin. By our nature, we sin. And we don't like admitting that, but it's a reality. Christ removes that sin from us. He redeems that debt that we owe because of sin. This idea of Redeemer comes from him. And even from the beginning of time, God has been trying to redeem humanity to himself. If you go back to the very beginning, in the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve, what did they do? A couple of weeks ago, Pastor talked about it. They failed. God said, you cannot eat from this tree. What did they do? They ate from the tree. And then they made excuses about eating from the tree. God, you aren't supposed to do that. All of a sudden, they realize they've sinned. They have sin dwelling within them now. And from that moment on, God gives them a covering. I want to connect with you. I want to have that relationship with you. You cannot be in my garden, but it does not mean I don't love you. It does not mean I don't want to connect with you. God has been reconnecting, restoring humanity from that time. And we will see that final restoration when Christ returns. But the idea of Redeemer comes from Christ, comes from God himself. I choose to redeem my people. I choose to redeem humanity. So when you hear the word, the title, Redeemer, in the Bible, pay attention to it. There's a Redeemer in Ruth. You may be thinking, okay, what does this have to do with excuses? And that would be a valid question. As I compare the Redeemer that we see in Ruth, Boaz, to the other guy, I'm just going to call him the other guy. The narrator doesn't give him a name, and probably for good reason, because he abdicates his responsibility. He lets go of his responsibility. But there's the Redeemer, Boaz, and the other guy, who should have been Redeemer and isn't. And I want you to see, as I contrast the two characters, who is the Redeemer, what are his qualities, and who is the other guy, and why does he make an excuse for why he is not able to redeem? It blows my mind that this guy would give up the opportunity when you see, in the grand scheme of things, God's desire for humanity. So, here's a quick summary of Ruth. Ruth chapters 1 through 3. I wrote in my notes, keep this concise, so we've got 25 minutes for the summary. Ruth is a foreigner, but marries into an Israelite family. So Ruth is one of the central characters of the story, and she's a foreigner. The problem with foreigners is that they are not Israelites, and they worship other gods. They worship false gods. And so when Ruth enters into the story, all of a sudden this idol worshiper, this non-believer, this non-Israelite comes in the story, and it's like, whoa. Why do we have a foreigner as the main character? Well, she comes in the story as a foreigner because she marries an Israelite family that has left the land of Israel. There is famine, there is disease, there is very scarce production in the land, and they leave to go to Ruth's country, Moab, in order to find jobs, in order to find resources to provide for themselves. And so Ruth marries one of the sons of Naomi. Naomi and Ruth are the two main ladies in the story. Naomi is the mother-in-law and Ruth is the daughter-in-law. And so you can imagine when Ruth marries in this family, she's trying to learn what are the Israelites? Who are they? What does being an Israelite means because I've married into this family? Well, Naomi's husband dies, Ruth's husband dies, and Naomi's other son dies. So there are 3 women that are all surviving their dead husbands. And they are on their own, they are destitute. And Naomi says, well, I've got nothing left in Moab, let's go back to Israel. The one daughter-in-law says, okay, well, I'm going back to my family. But Ruth says, no, I'm sticking with you. I know who the God of Israel is. I know who Yahweh is by virtue of you. You have told me who Yahweh is. He's going to be my God. I'm giving up the other gods. I want Yahweh to be my God. Your people will be my people. Your God will be my God. So you see Ruth adopting herself into this family. Well, Ruth and Naomi get back to Israel, and they still have no money, they still have no land, they still have nowhere to go except back to the hometown, Bethlehem, or nearby Bethlehem. And so they go back, and when they go back, they go and they start gleaning in the field. If you don't know what gleaning is, it's that all the extra, so as the workers come by, they gather all of the stalks, all the sheaves together, and they put them in big bundles, but they leave some on the side, and that is for the poor people. That is set aside so that the poor can go out, they can work to gather what little food they can find on the edges of the field, and that is the gleaning. Well, Boaz notices Ruth. Maybe she was beautiful. Maybe she stood out as a foreigner. For whatever reason, Boaz notices her. And he connects the dots. He says that she's connected to Naomi's family. So he tells his workers, number 1, protect her. You can imagine field workers and what they go through when there's no one to protect them. He tells his workers, protect her, keep her safe, and throw a little extra grain on the side for her. So Boaz starts working his little magic. Naomi, on the other hand, is working her magic. She sends Ruth out to go and glean in Boaz's field, and so she does. And before you know it, she's a hard worker. Everyone notices that she's a hard worker. She's a foreigner, but they notice. And so she starts gathering and gleaning, and Boaz keeps just giving her more, like, I'm going to keep feeding you because you're beautiful, and I want you to keep coming back into my field. And so she keeps coming back. Well, one day Naomi says, you need a husband. Tells Ruth, you need a husband. And so she says, when you see Boaz threshing the grain, that is separating the grain from the stalk and from the outer shell. When you see him threshing the grain, it'll be at night because that's when they usually do it. When he's alone at night threshing the grain, this is the weird part where we start to enter the story and we're like, what is happening? And when you go to him, after he's eaten, after he's drank, and he lays down to sleep, he's going to cover himself because it's cold at night. You get under the covers at the foot of his bed or wherever he's staying. And when he wakes up, he'll notice you, and he'll take over from there. Interesting. It's not a typical American story. So we have to figure out what that means. But you can see from this point, Ruth and Naomi are destitute. They have nothing. Ruth has been working hard to get grain on the side to provide. They don't even have a home as far as we know. They're probably staying with a relative of some sort. They've probably found somewhere where they can just shelter themselves. As far as we know, they don't have a home. They don't have a job except for what Ruth goes out and does, and they have absolutely no land. Their land has been leased out because they have nothing. Enter the scene in chapter 3, which is where we'll start. So we know that Naomi has already told her, go out. Chapter 3, verse 6. So Ruth went down to the threshing floor and did as her mother-in-law had commanded her. And when Boaz had eaten and drunk and his heart was merry, he went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain. And then she came softly and uncovered his feet and lay down. At midnight, the man was startled. I understand him being startled at this point. Wouldn't you? What is going, who are you? Why are you, this is, for anyone who's ever lost the covers at night, why did you steal the covers? Is what I'm thinking, but maybe that's not what Boaz was thinking. At midnight, the man was startled and turned over, and behold, a woman lay at his feet. He said, who are you? Because it's dark. He already knows who Ruth is, but it's dark. And she said, I'm Ruth, your servant. Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer. Turn with me to Ezekiel chapter 16. Spread your wings over me. Cover me with this blanket, because you are a redeemer. What's required of a redeemer? Well, a redeemer has to have money to redeem, for one thing. Imagine, my family has this 100 acres, right? And we have to lease it out. I'm going to guess it's a few $1 million. If I were to sell 100 acres today, it would be a good chunk of change, right? I'm not a millionaire. Maybe, I started calculating this when I was in high school. Maybe, if I add up all the money that I will ever make and never had to pay any bills whatsoever, I might get close to making $1 million. Maybe, if I'm lucky. I'm not a millionaire, and I probably never ever will be, unless for some reason I get a check in the mail from someone. And if you want to write a check out and send it in the mail, I'm not going to turn it down. So, what is a redeemer? They have to have money to be able to restore the land. So if there's a $10 million debt on this land, I can never pay $10 million. Someone has to pay that money for me. And that person loses the money. They pay the money so the land can come back to me. They don't get the land. The redeemer also has to be a close family member. They have to be someone that is closely related, linked into the family. This would be a cousin. This would be a brother-in-law. This would be someone who has means and is related, so that the land can stay in the family. This idea, when Ruth says, cover your wings over me, this is an idea that God is saying, this is what I do for my people. When I redeem you, when I look after you, when I protect you, when I restore you, I cover you over in this manner. Ezekiel chapter 16, verse 1. Even though Ezekiel's talking about Israel as the she or the woman in the story, and she will eventually turn away from God. The very beginning of this is describing what God has done for Israel, and I think it is such a beautiful thing. Again, the word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, make known to Jerusalem her abominations, and say, thus says the Lord God to Israel, your origin and your birth are of a land of the Canaanites. Your father was an Amorite, and your mother a Hittite. They're foreigners. Your parents are foreigners. And as for your birth, on the day you were born, your cord was not cut, nor were you washed with water to cleanse you, nor rubbed with salt, nor wrapped in swaddling clothes. No, I pitied you. To do any of these things to you was out of compassion for you. No one did. But you were cast out on the open field, for you were abhorred, and on the day that you were born. So this picture of this child being abandoned, just being cast out on the field. No one wants this child. This is Israel. No one wants this child. She has been abandoned and left to die because no one cares about her. Then the Lord enters. Verse 6, when I passed by you and saw you wallowing in your blood, I said to you, in your blood, live. I said to you, in your blood, live. I made you flourish like a plant in the field, and you grew up and became tall and arrived at full adornment. Your breasts were formed and your hair had grown, yet you were naked and bare. So I have helped you to live from infancy, but you were still naked. Verse 8, then when I passed by you again and saw you, behold, you were at the age of love, and I spread the corner of my garment over you and covered your nakedness. I made my vow to you and entered into a covenant with you, declares the Lord God, and you became mine. Seeing the picture in Ruth, then I bathed you with water and washed off your blood from you and anointed you with oil. I clothed you with embroidered cloth and put fine leather on your feet. I wrapped you in fine linen and covered you with silk, and I adorned you with ornaments and bracelets on your wrists and a chain on your neck. You see that God has not only protected this Israel from infancy, has washed her clean, has given her new life, has allowed her to flourish and to live, and has covered her with fine clothes and earrings and jewelry. This is what Yahweh does for his people. This is what God does for his people. And you see, the same type of covering, Ruth is saying, I need you to protect me and to cover me and provide for me. That is the same type of covering that Ruth is asking for. And so you can imagine Boaz has already been named a righteous person. He's already shown favor to Ruth by looking after her, providing extra for her, giving her more than she ever deserved as someone who is poor and landless. He's already given to her, and yet he still decides to give to her again. Number one on your outline, if you're following along, I need to pay attention to service opportunities around me. Boaz is looking for opportunities to serve Ruth, has already been doing it in the field, and now says, yes, I will cover you. Verse 10, he said, may you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter. You have made this last kindness greater than the first, and that you have not gone after young men, whether rich or poor. And now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do everything you ask. I will redeem you. I need to pay attention to service opportunities around me. See, when I read Ruth, I read in this idea that this is a story about us as well. This isn't just a story about a woman from ancient Israel. This is a story about us. God has expected that humanity come to him in faithful relationship. God has expected and done everything possible to bring humanity to him. But he also expects that those who come as his children, who are adopted into his family, those people also look after other people. And so when you see the story of Boaz looking after Ruth, it is literally a symbol of Jesus looking after us and God's expectation for us to look after others. But there's not just a marriage taking place here. Boaz promises, I will marry you. And as far as we know in the story, he has acted as a gentleman would and should. He hasn't taken advantage of Ruth in any way. Although some might say that, some might read into that. You don't see that in the text at all. So he has not only promised to provide for her, protect her, he has acted righteously and responsibly with her. And here's a man who has said, I'm going to redeem you. But not just a marriage redemption. When Boaz promises to redeem Ruth, he's going to pay a handsome sum of money in order to fully restore Naomi's property. Get it? He's not restoring Ruth's property. He's restoring Naomi's. Boaz doesn't see a penny of this money. So if it's $10 million to restore this field, Boaz says, I'll pay $10 million to restore the field and to marry you. Because I want you to find full restoration in the land, as you should. Boaz, however, is not the closest redeemer. There is another, the other guy, remember him in the story? There is another. A redeemer had to be a person with financial ability to redeem, but also had to be the closest relative, a male relative, obviously. There was the other guy, who was actually the first in line to redeem the property before Boaz. And when Boaz approaches the other guy at the city gate, he gathers witnesses so that there could be no contest between the men. So the law was, if you're going to act in a business transaction in the front of the city gate, you have to have at least 2 witnesses. What does Boaz do? He gets 10 witnesses. I'm not just getting 2, I'm getting 10. So everyone knows I've done the right thing and I've acted responsibly and honorably. Starting in chapter 4, verse 1. Now Boaz went up to the city gate and sat down there. And behold, the Redeemer of whom Boaz had spoken came by. This other guy. Remember, that's his name. Not even worthy of a real name. Boaz said, turn aside, friend, sit here. And so he sat. And then they took 10 of the elders of the city and said, sit down here. And so they sat. And then he said to the Redeemer, Boaz names the other guy the Redeemer. Imagine, Boaz is already telling this guy, you are the redeemer for this family. You have the responsibility of looking after this family. You have the responsibility to protect them, to restore them, and to provide for them. That's what Boaz is telling this guy. And so what does the guy say? Buy it in the presence of those sitting here and in the presence of the elders. If you will redeem it, redeem it. If you will not, tell me that I may know, for there's no one besides you to redeem it, and I come after you. And the other guy said, this is the end of verse 4, I will redeem it. But wait, there's a catch. Boaz offers the opportunity of redemption to the other guy. The other guy sees an investment opportunity. Oh yeah, 100 acres? I'll pay for it. I'll add that to my estate. See, the other guy is thinking only financial. Boaz is thinking there are women who are in desperate need of restoration. The other guy's thinking, hey, I'll pay $10 million, I'll get this field. This field will provide an income for me for years to come. It will continue to provide an income for me. I will just add it to my estate, and I'll give it to my son. Cool. I'll redeem it. Yeah, of course I will. Boaz says, okay, wait, there is a stipulation. Not really a stipulation, if you will, just part of the rules. He says, verse 5, the day you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you also acquire Ruth, the Moabite, the widow of the dead, in order to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance. Oh. So I have to have the woman too. And she's a foreigner. And as far as the other guy knows, because he doesn't know who she is, she worships idols. And so I have to bring an idol-worshiping woman into my home. And on top of that, I never get to see the field because I'm supposed to give this woman a son, and the field will go to his son. So you're saying I have to pay $10 million out of my own pocket to pay for someone else's field that I will never actually get to see revenue from. I have to marry this woman, bring her into my house, and she probably worships idols. She's probably going to destroy my house. And my estate, my inheritance, is going to be siphoned away from me? That's what you're saying? And Boaz is looking at him like, yep. So, you've already said you want a redeemer. Go ahead. I'm sorry. I don't know that I can do that. The other guy said, I can't redeem it for myself, lest I impair my own inheritance. It's not worth my time. It's not worth the trouble of losing my own money. It's not worth it for me. The guy had dollar signs in his eyes, when instead he should have had people signs in his eyes. Turn with me to James chapter 1. I've been thinking through this whole time, what is it that God is saying it makes us different? Why are we different from everyone else? As Christians, what sets us apart? What makes us stand apart? James chapter 1, verse 19. Know this, my beloved brothers. Let every person be quick to hear and slow to speak and slow to anger. For the anger of man does not produce the righteousness of God. So obviously James is saying your point is to live righteously. So you're going to have to get rid of the stuff that is unrighteous in your life. Therefore, verse 21, put away all filthiness and rampant wickedness and receive with meekness the implanted word which is able to save your souls. Verse 22, but be doers of the word and not hearers only, deceiving yourselves. For if anyone is a hearer of the word and is not a doer, he is like a man who looks intently at his natural face in a mirror. For he looks at himself and goes away and at once forgets what he looks like. But the one who looks into the perfect law, the law of liberty, and perseveres, being no hearer who forgets, but a doer who acts, he will be blessed in his doing. So James is saying, hey, be doers of the word. Don't just hear, but also put what you hear into practice. Put it into action. And then in verse 26 he says, if anyone thinks he is religious and does not bridle his tongue but deceives his heart, this person's religion is worthless. Religion is pure and undefiled before God. Religion that is pure and undefiled before God the Father is this: to visit orphans and widows in their affliction, and to keep oneself unstained in the world. We are in the people business. We're not in the dollar sign business. And I am not bringing condemnation on someone who makes money by any means. Boaz had money. Boaz had to have money in order to redeem. I'm not saying that you can't make money. I'm saying that our priority in this earth is people. So when James says pure religion, when you want to call yourself religious, you have to take care of those that are disenfranchised. You have to look after other people. When Jesus sums up all the law and the prophets by this one saying, he says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. You love God and you love people. We are in the business of people, not in the business of money. I couldn't care less what you make on your paycheck. What I care about is whether you are looking after people. And I condemn myself with that statement by telling you the story about how I treated the man at Taco Bell. I was not in the people business at that point in time. I wasn't thinking about his soul. I wasn't thinking about his heart. I was thinking about money. I was thinking about other things. I was not thinking about people. I condemn myself in that. I'm saying that we are to be people that are going after people, that care about people, that look after people. That is what we do. So when Boaz is redeeming these women, he gives this redeemer an opportunity to redeem them. And the other guy says, no, dollar signs. And I can't make dollar signs by doing this deal. Therefore, I give my right to redeem over to you. That is the most foolish thing that guy ever did in his entire life. Why do I say that? Because he is only named for one thing in the Bible, and he wasn't even named for doing that. He's in the Bible as an unnamed character who did the wrong thing. That's it. What did Boaz do? Well, one of his great children happened to be King David, greatest king in all of Israel, or one of the greatest kings in all of Israel. Oh, wait. One of his great children happened to be Jesus, this guy that we worship on Sunday mornings. What did Boaz do? He did the right thing and he looked after people. And it just so happened that God produced an effect that lasted for the end of time. There's a difference between making an excuse for not doing the right thing and then going after people and looking after the hearts of people. You may be making excuses, and they may take several forms. I can't help that person because it would take too much time. Anyone ever said that? I have. If I help someone with their job, I won't be able to finish mine. I've said that. No, I can't give you money because I don't have enough to give. Interesting. You don't think that God will provide for you. I can't really help you because I need time for me. Okay. Whatever the case is, when you are thinking about what you get out of it, you are making an excuse. When you are looking after what you can do for others, you are doing it in like manner to Christ redeeming humanity. Turn one more time to the New Testament with me. Philippians chapter 2, verse 3. Highlighting this people business. Do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves. God is calling his people to be investors in other people. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but in humility consider others more important than yourselves. Wow, if that doesn't kick you, I don't know what will. You are being told that other people take priority to you, and that does not sit well in our individualistic American society, does it? No, it does not. What are the type of people, what are the people groups like during this time of Ruth? Well, they are communal people. They do everything together. They farm the fields together. It's not like I'm going to go farm my field, you go farm yours. We all go and farm mine, then we all go and farm yours. When the women are doing the laundry or cooking, because unfortunately, whatever you believe now, that was their job then. They did it together. There's no washing machine in every house. They all go out to the river together to do laundry. They cook together, sometimes around a communal fire. The family lived together. What do you mean by that, Brian? Yeah, when you married, you just built on a house right next to your parents. There were no doors. What? There are no doors because it was anticipated that people were just going to walk into your house. This was daily life. This was regular life. This was doing life with people. And we don't do that. And we even have trouble wrapping our brains around that concept because that's not how we live. But if you are to consider others before yourself, it's going to change your perspective on other people. That means when you are asked to do something, you don't think about the time requirements. You think about the person's heart and the person's soul and how much the person needs your help when you go to help them. You see the difference? When Boaz is redeeming Naomi's field and redeeming Ruth, giving her an heir, giving her a son, he is doing it so that these women will be brought back into the fellowship of the community. Number 2, I need to remember my responsibilities to help others in times of need. I need to remember my responsibilities to help others in time of need. Oh, Bryan, I don't help people. Okay, get started. Possibly the most exciting part of this entire story is the completion of the redemptive act. This is cool. When Boaz redeems and marries Ruth, it is to bring fulfillment, not to his own life, because he says, I'm glad that you went after me and not a younger man. Ruth could have had any man. She actually didn't have to tell people that she was a Moabite, because at this point she has adopted herself into Israel. So she could have had any man. She could have gone after the younger men. She goes after Boaz because he has already proven himself to be a man of integrity. He's already proven himself to look after. He's already proven that he cares for who she is. And so Boaz, while he was getting a good part of this deal, he was getting to marry this really cool woman who is known as a hard-working woman, who is known as a woman of integrity. He's marrying this woman. It's not for him. The cool part of the story is that the women are redeemed. And this is what the women of the city say about Naomi. Blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without a redeemer, and may his name be renowned in Israel. The redeemer points to God. Who is the his? Is it the redeemer that will be renowned, or is it God that will be renowned? Both. Because the redeemer points to God. The redemption is an act of working with God. And so, he shall be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age. What did God do in Ezekiel chapter 16? He restored life and he nourished it so that Israel, the girl Israel, would be born up, would be raised up to have life. He says, live. That is what the Redeemer does. And this other guy gave up that right to let someone else do it because it wasn't worth his time. The reality is we make choices every single day. We choose to get up, we choose to work, we choose to study or to sit idly. We choose to help people or we choose to push people away. And we say it isn't worth the trouble. But we don't just say it isn't worth the trouble. We say he isn't worth the trouble. She isn't worth the trouble. We say that people are not worth the trouble. My challenge to you this morning is it's time for us to start laying down our excuses. It's time for us to stop worrying so much about whether we have the skill set, whether we have the opportunity, whether fill in the blank. It's time for us to stop making excuses and just get into action helping people. Because you are partnering with God who is already working to redeem his people. What does it look like for you to partner with God in that redemption process? I mean, that blows my mind that God would even let us have that opportunity. But he gives us the chance to join with him to look after people. You could take it or you could not take it. But I say it's time for us to stop making excuses for the way in which we live our lives, for the way that we work with people. It is time for us to start having more redeeming qualities about us when we live our lives. As humans, as Christians, it is time for us to start working redemption with God in redemption in other people's lives. Amen? If we are not going to do that, we might as well close the doors and call it good. This is what we do. We are in the people business. Number 3, I need to remember that I am a partner with God as he redeems his creation. I need to remember that I am a partner with God as he redeems his creation. You will not do the redemption part. Sorry to say, if that bursts your bubble, I'm sorry. You will not do the redemption part. God is doing the redeeming, but he is bringing us alongside to do that. Maybe God wants to work in your heart, in your life, to bring fulfillment to someone else. God is bringing the fulfillment, but he's using you to go out and be the encourager, to go out and be the helper. You have the opportunity to speak into someone's life. And if you choose not to take that opportunity, I'm sorry. That moment has been wasted. That moment has been lost. David Brainerd is known in the mission community to be one of the heroes of missionary enterprise. David Brainerd. If you're interested, take a look at him one time. With the exception of being written about after his death, this guy would have been lost to obscurity. Now remember I said, you might say, I don't have a lot of skill, I'm not going to make a big impact, I don't have a big footprint to do something for Christ. David Brainerd was that guy who did not make a big impact. And yet, he is known as one of the heroes to the missionary enterprise. Why? Well, he went to Yale. You heard of Yale? Before it was a university? He went to Yale. He got kicked out for using his mouth inappropriately. Anyone ever said something the wrong way? Maybe you didn't say it to a professor, but you said it to someone, you got in trouble? He did. He got kicked out. So imagine, what do we get kicked out of college for these days? This guy got kicked out of college for saying the wrong thing at the wrong time to the wrong professor who decided to tell someone. They kicked him out. He petitioned to be let back into college and said, no, we're not letting anyone like you destroy our reputation. Interesting thing, Princeton College / University was actually formed because David Brainerd was kicked out of Yale. They formed Princeton because a whole bunch of people were really upset that David Brainerd got kicked out of Yale, and so they started their own college and said, hey, if you're going to treat people like that, we're going and we're starting our own college. Interesting that he had no significant impact, and yet a college was started because of him. Not just one. Dartmouth was also started because of him, and I'll tell you why. David Brainerd, when he was kicked out of Yale, decided that I'm going to do something with my life. I made a mistake there. I'm not going to let that define me. And so he goes and he is ordained as a minister to go and preach to the Native Americans. This guy has absolutely not one word of Native American skill on his tongue. He has no clue what he's doing. But he says, I'm going to make an impact, and so I'm going to go be ordained to go and speak to the Native Americans because they need the gospel of Jesus Christ just as much as all the white people in this town. And so he goes. He goes out to the forest. He goes out to the plains. He goes out. This is all around the northeastern area. He goes into several different places. And he is right in the middle of the battleground between the English and the French and the Native Americans. If you've heard of the French and Indian War, it's happening around the time that he's trying to minister. He's right at the forefront of the battle. Lived in a little hut. Lived on the ground in the forest. Lived in someone's lived in just someone's living room for a while. Was near death many times. He thought, you know what? This isn't quite going like I thought it was going to. I thought I was going to make a great impact, but this isn't working. I'm going to go find another group of Native Americans to speak to because I'm not making any headway here. Right at that time, a couple of congregations heard about him and said, well, you know what? We don't want you to leave. Why don't you come take it easy for a while? Why don't you come and pastor our two congregations? You can go back and forth between the two congregations. You can stay here in relative comfort for the rest of your life, preaching to these two congregations. David Brainerd said, I've already put my hand to the missionary plow. I am not stopping. I'm going to continue this course that I've already set because this is where God has called my life. For the rest of my life, this is what I'm doing. And his life really wasn't that long after that moment in time. When you look at his impact on the mission field, he actually did hardly anything. Dartmouth, they started a college because of him, because of his bravery and his courage and his desire to go out and witness to the Native American people. Dartmouth started a school to train people to go and witness to the Native American people. 2 schools named after him. The only reason that people know about his name today is because a man by the name of Edwards wrote a book about his life and said this is a man who decided to go to the frontier of America and start witnessing to Native American people. And forevermore, from that time in the mid-1700s, when they wrote a book about his life and it was published and it started getting out to missionaries, this man, although he had relatively little significant impact when he was alive, has been challenging missionaries from that day forward for 200 plus years, has been challenging missionaries to get out on the mission field and start going out where God is calling them to witness. This is what happens when we go out and we start charting the course that God has planned for us, and we start doing that which God has called us to do. We are called to be the redeeming force working with God in this world. We are called to go and share the gospel with people. We are called to go and bring redemption and restoration to people's hearts and lives. We are called to go and visit the poor and the sick and help those that are in desperate need. We are called to go and change lives, and we are called to make that first step. And some of us have been making excuses saying, I'm not going because I have other things on my plate. And I say, hogwash. Wipe your plate clean and go and do that which God has called you to do. God, you have brought us to this place this morning. Where we have to make a decision. What is more important? People or our time and our money and our stuff and our status?